Let me tell you a secret the Russian royals never wanted the world to hear. On a night in July 1918, deep inside a basement in Ekaterinburg, the Romanov family, the last Tsar of Russia, his wife, and their children were executed in cold blood. Bullets tore through the air, chaos reigned, and when the smoke cleared, every royal was believed to be dead. But then, a whisper began to spread, a rumor too wild to ignore. One daughter had survived. Her name was Anastasia. Some swore she had escaped through the chaos, smuggled away in the dark by loyalists. Others claimed her body was never found. Over the decades, mysterious women emerged, declaring, "I am Anastasia." Some were exposed as frauds, others vanished into history. But the question never died. Did Russia's lost princess truly survive? What if the story you thought you knew was a lie? What if Anastasia Romanov, the girl who shouldn't have lived, defied history itself? The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of boots on stone. July 16th, 1918, Ekaterinburg, deep in the Ural Mountains. Inside the Ipatiev house, the Romanovs, the last royal family of Russia, were roused from their sleep. Guards ordered them to dress quickly and follow. Nicholas, too weary and defeated, carried his son Alexei in his arms, the boy too sickly to walk. Alexandra, pale and trembling, clutched the hands of her daughters Solga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. They were told it was for their safety. They were to be moved, the guards said, away from the unrest, away from the threat of the advancing White Army. But the whispers of the children betrayed their doubt. They had been moved before, always further from Moscow, always deeper into obscurity. Now, in the middle of the night, they were herded into a basement chamber with bare walls and a dirt floor. Nicholas tried to maintain dignity, asking for chairs for his family. The guards obliged, lining the royals in a row, as though for a portrait no one would ever see. Alexandra crossed herself, whispering a prayer. The children huddled close, Anastasia clutching her dog Jemmy, her eyes darting nervously from face to face. Then the command was given. The crack of gunfire exploded in the confined space. Bullets ricocheted off walls, filling the room with smoke and screams. Nicholas fell first, shot point blank. Alexandra crumpled beside him. Chaos erupted, guards stumbling, the Romanov daughters shrieking, their jewels sewn into their corsets, deflecting bullets like hidden armor. In the haze, bayonets were drawn, stabbing wildly to finish what bullets had not. When it was over, silence descended. Bodies sprawled across the floor. The dynasty that had ruled Russia for more than 3 centuries lay broken in blood and smoke. The guards dragged the corpses into trucks, loaded them for disposal in a forest grave. But here, history fractures, because amid the carnage, amid the confusion, whispers began. Some guards insisted that not all the children had died instantly. 1 or 2 had cried out, clung to life, even as the executioners struck again. In the chaos, could one have been overlooked? Could one have slipped away in the darkness? The legend took root quickly. Anastasia, the youngest daughter, had survived. She was 16, mischievous, spirited, the Romanov child, known for her wit and defiance. If anyone could escape, people said, it would be her. In the weeks after the execution, rumors spread through Russia. A girl seen fleeing into the woods. A mysterious young woman rescued by peasants. A survivor hidden by loyalists, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. The Bolsheviks, determined to erase every trace of the Romanovs, tried to stamp out the story. They released official statements insisting that the entire family was dead, but the bodies told a different story. When the mass grave was finally discovered, decades later, 2 skeletons were missing. Scientists identified Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 daughters, but Alexei and 1 sister were gone. Was that sister Anastasia? The gap between truth and myth widened, and into that gap stepped women from across Europe, each claiming to be the lost princess. Some were quickly dismissed as but one, Anna Anderson, would ignite a firestorm that raged for decades. She bore scars. She knew details only Anastasia could know, and her story of escape was hauntingly believable. She claimed she had been smuggled from the execution site, hidden by sympathizers, and carried across Europe in secret. For Elizabeth Tudor, survival had been politics. For Anastasia Romanov, it became legend, the image of Hertha, defiant child, slipping through the cracks of history captured. The world's imagination. Novels were written, plays performed, films made. Anastasia became a symbol of survival against impossible odds, a ghost of a dynasty destroyed by revolution. But what is truth and what is fantasy? Did Anastasia truly survive that brutal night in a or was it the desperate hope of a broken world, clinging to the belief that at least one Romanov child had escaped the slaughter? This is the story of Anastasia, the miracle survivor, or the greatest myth of the 20th century. The guns in Ekaterinburg had fallen silent, but their echoes spread far beyond the Ural Mountains. Across Russia, whispers carried like smoke. The Tsar and his family were dead yet. Something about the story never seemed complete. Official proclamations from the Bolsheviks were clumsy, contradictory, half-hidden. They first announced only Nicholas's death, then later suggested the family had also perished. But why no body? Why no undeniable proof? In a world already shaken by war and revolution, the uncertainty fed hope, and into that void of certainty slipped a story that would not die. One Romanov child survived. It was Anastasia's name that clung to every whisper. Perhaps because she was the youngest daughter, known for her vitality and spark. Perhaps because her mischief had made her memorable to the nurses, guards, and tutors who spoke of her. Or perhaps simply because people needed her to have survived the symbol of innocence, escaping the brutality of revolution. In the chaos of post-revolutionary Russia, tales abounded. A girl rescued from the executioners and hidden in a peasant's cart. A nun in a convent who wept at the mention of Anastasia's name. Soldiers swearing they had seen a young woman slip away into the forests. Every rumor was impossible to prove, but none could be dismissed outright. By the early 1920s, the rumors leaped across borders. Russian emigres who had fled the revolution carried stories to Paris, Berlin, London. Monarchists clung to the idea that a Romanov still lived, a figure who might one day restore the dynasty. And so, when a mysterious young woman appeared in Berlin in 1920, pulled from a canal after a suicide attempt, the world was ready to believe. She was fragile, broken, refusing to give her name. Doctors called her Fräulein, unbekannt, Miss Unknown. She bore scars across her body, physical reminders of violence. She spoke German with a Russian lilt, and when she finally began to reveal herself, her words shocked those who heard them. She claimed she was Anastasia Romanov. Her name, as she gave it, was Anna Anderson. At first, many dismissed her. Another desperate woman in post-war Europe, inventing a fantasy. But then something strange happened. People who had known the Romanovs visited her, and some swore she was telling the truth. Former servants, courtiers, distant relatives insisted she resembled Anastasia. She remembered details of the palace, of family nicknames, of private jokes no outsider should know. Even her mannerisms, the tilt of her head, the way she walked seemed uncannily familiar. Skeptics argued otherwise. They called her a fraud, a cunning impostor, taking advantage of myth. They demanded proof, and none was forthcoming. Yet Anna Anderson's story grew, and with it, the legend of Anastasia deepened. In drawing rooms across Europe, the debate raged. Was the Grand Duchess alive? Had she escaped the bullets of a cannon? And if she had, who had saved her? Loyalists who risked everything, or sheer chance amid chaos? The newspapers devoured the story. Headlines screamed of the lost princess. Films were made, plays written, novels spun. To a world devastated by war, revolution, and despair, the idea of Anastasia surviving was irresistible. She became a symbol of resilience, of innocence spared, of hope rising from tragedy. But the truth was tangled. Even as Anna Anderson fought in courts for recognition, rival claimants appeared. Across Europe, women stepped forward, declaring, "I am Anastasia." Some told wild stories of escapes through forests. Others claimed secret marriages, hidden children, clandestine rescues by Cossacks. Most were quickly discredited, their lies too fragile to endure. But the sheer number of claimants kept the myth alive. For Elizabeth Tudor, survival had been strategy. For Anastasia, it became a canvas upon which the world painted its dreams and fears. Every whisper, every claimant, every headline pulled her deeper into legend, and still, the mystery remained, the missing bodies. When the Romanov grave was first unearthed decades later, it contained Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 daughters. But Alexei and 1 sister were gone. Too many, this was proof. Anastasia's body had not been found because she had lived. The story spread like wildfire, becoming more than just history. It became a fairy tale for a broken age. The princess who defied death. The girl who outlasted bullets and bayonets. Anastasia, the miracle survivor. But fairy tales cast long shadows. For every believer, there were skeptics waiting with knives of logic. For every loyalist clinging to her survival, there were revolutionaries insisting it was a lie. And in the middle of it all, one question refused to die. Was Anastasia truly alive? Or had the world created a ghost to comfort itself? Berlin, 1920. The city was a broken heart stitched together with smoke and hunger. After the Great War, crowds shuffled through streets lined with wounded soldiers, hollow-eyed mothers, and children who had forgotten laughter. In this bleak landscape, a single rumor sparked like a match in the dark. The Tsar's daughter lives, Anna Anderson. The mysterious woman pulled from the Landwehr Canal became the epicenter of the storm. She was thin, haunted, with scars etched into her body like maps of old pain. At first, she refused to speak, curling into silence as though the world was an enemy. But when she began to whisper her identity, everything changed. She said she was Anastasia. It seemed impossible, yet her words carried weight. Former courtiers and servants who visited her swore they saw the Romanov child in her eyes. She remembered the layout of the Alexandra palace, the pet names the family used in private, even the way Alexandra scolded her for mischief. Some said her gestures were identical, how she tilted her head, the nervous way she touched her fingers. Supporters began to gather. Russian émigrés, broken by exile, desperate for hope, clung to her like pilgrims to a relic. To them, she was not just a survivor, she was living proof that the dynasty had not been entirely erased. A princess had defied the revolution, but skeptics sharpened their knives. Doctors examined her and declared she was mentally unstable. Politicians called her a fraud, a woman exploiting myth for survival. Even some Romanov relatives rejected her. Grand Duchess Olga, Anastasia's aunt, declared firmly, "She is not my niece." The battle lines were drawn, believers against doubters, hope against reason. The press feasted on it. Headlines blared, "Is this the lost Romanov?" Reporters crowded hospitals, cafes, and courtrooms. Each article painted Anna as either a tragic heroine or a cunning impostor. Photographs of her face were compared obsessively to old portraits of Anastasia, lines drawn from cheek to brow, as though the truth could be measured in millimeters. The controversy spiraled into one of the longest-running legal battles of the century. For decades, courts in Germany heard testimony, weighed evidence, and listened to argument. Experts paraded through, some swearing she was undeniably the princess, others tearing her claims apart. Every hearing was a theater of whispers and gasps, as the question echoed again and again, was she Anastasia? Anna herself did little to make it easier. At times, she seemed fragile and sincere, a woman crushed by trauma, her memories breaking through in fragments. At other times, she was combative, evasive, even cruel. She pushed away supporters, lashed out at doubters, lived in poverty one day and splendor the next. Her contradictions only deepened the mystery, yet the allure of her claim refused to die. Writers turned her story into novels. Filmmakers adapted it for the screen. Audiences across Europe and America devoured the tale of the princess who had cheated death. In smoky theaters, people wept as Anastasia, the girl who should have died, was reunited with her family. Whether Anna Anderson was real or not, the myth had taken on a life of its own. Behind closed doors, Romanov relatives argued bitterly. Some believed her, convinced by her knowledge and resemblance. Others saw only a fraud tainting their name. The debate fractured families, friendships, even political alliances. And always, Anna remained at the center in enigma, a ghost, a woman who might be history's greatest survivor or its boldest impostor. Decades passed, and still the courts did not deliver a final answer. The case dragged on for over 30 years, with rulings shifting back and forth, until finally it ended without resolution. The judges declared the evidence insufficient to prove or disprove her claim. Anna Anderson went to her grave in 1984, still insisting she was Anastasia. But even in death, the question lingered. Her supporters continued to call her the miracle princess. Her skeptics dismissed her as a con, and the world remained captivated, because perhaps the truth was never the point. Anastasia had become more than a girl, more than a Romanov daughter. She was a story people needed to believe in, a story of survival, defiance, and hope against horror. Whether Anna Anderson was truly Anastasia or not, the legend she carried ensured that the youngest Romanov would never be forgotten. By the mid-20th century, Anastasia was no longer just a person, a girl whose story had outgrown history and settled deep into imagination. Across Europe and America, her name appeared everywhere, in theaters, in newspapers, in whispered conversations over dinner tables. The image of the lost Romanov princess captured a world haunted by its own scars. After the First World War, the collapse of empires, the Spanish flu, and the Great Depression, people longed for stories of survival, miracles, and hidden royalty. Anastasia became that symbol, the child who had defied executioners, the princess who had walked out of a grave. Anna Anderson remained at the center of the storm, but she was not alone. Other claimants appeared, a women in Poland, France, even America, each declaring themselves to be the true Anastasia. Most were quickly unmasked, their lies flimsy, their stories too convenient. Yet every new claimant kept the fire alive, proof that the world was unwilling to let the legend die. Hollywood soon seized the story. In 1956, 20th Century Fox released Anastasia, a lavish film starring Ingrid Bergman. The movie didn't insist on her survival, but played with the possibility. Presenting a mysterious woman convinced her, perhaps manipulated, to believing she was the princess. Audiences flocked to see it, and Bergman won an Academy Award for her performance. The film blurred the lines further, embedding Anastasia's myth into pop culture as a romantic mystery, half-truth and half-fairy tale. In the smoky cinemas of Paris and New York, viewers wept as Bergman's Anastasia reclaimed her identity, embraced as the lost heir. History was rewritten on the screen, not as tragedy, but as miracle. The legend of Anastasia was no longer confined to émigré circles or courtrooms. It belonged to the world. Meanwhile, Anna Anderson lived in shadows, moving across Europe and later America, sustained by her supporters, but plagued by her skeptics. Some of her backers funded her lifestyle, convinced she was the rightful heir. Others turned away, disillusioned by her mercurial behavior, her flashes of cruelty, her stubborn refusal to prove her identity. She remained an enigma, part tragic figure, part fraud, part maybe miracle. What made her so compelling was not just her claim, but the timing. The Cold War had begun, and the Romanovs were symbols of a world destroyed by revolution. To monarchists and anti-communists, Anastasia's survival story was more than just intrigue, it was propaganda. If a Romanov could live, then the Soviet regime's brutality could be exposed. The myth became a weapon, carried in whispers and headlines, its power stretching far beyond the girl it claimed to describe. Yet the darker side of the legend was never far. Survivors of the Russian Revolution scoffed at the fantasy, recalling the brutality of Ekaterinburg. Historians demanded evidence. Skeptics pointed out inconsistencies in Anderson's story, details that didn't match, timelines that shifted. But hope is stronger than doubt. For every historian who dismissed her, there were crowds willing to believe. The Anastasia myth also transformed in another way. It became a universal story. She was no longer just the Romanov princess. She was the girl who lived. Her tale resonated with anyone who had lost family in war, anyone who dreamed of escape, Anyone who wanted to believe that innocence could survive even the darkest violence. By the 1970s, Anderson's health was failing. She settled in Virginia with her husband, living quietly but never renouncing her claim. Visitors still came, pilgrims of a sort, seeking to see in her eyes the spark of Anastasia. Some swore they found it. Others left convinced they had been fooled, but whether Anderson was Anastasia or not had become almost irrelevant. The legend had outgrown her. Novels turned the story into romance. Theater productions reimagined her escape as destiny. Children read illustrated tales where Anastasia slipped away from her captors, guided by fate. The line between truth and myth blurred until few cared where it lay, even as historians dug deeper, uncovering accounts of the execution of bodies burned and buried. The legend persisted. When the mass grave was finally discovered in 1979 but kept secret until 1991, it contained only 9 bodies. 2 were missing, Alexei and 1 daughter. That gap breathed fresh air into the myth. Was it Anastasia? Had she truly escaped into the forests of Russia, hidden by loyalists, alive somewhere out there? The missing bodies were like an empty throne, waiting to be claimed. Anderson had claimed it most convincingly, but the legend was larger than her. Anastasia was no longer a girl of flesh and blood. She was an idea, a symbol of survival that no grave could contain. The world loved her too much to let her die. The snow lay thick over Ekaterinburg in the winter of 1979 when 2 local men, searching for evidence of the past, stumbled upon bones buried in the earth. Hidden deep in the Ural soil were the remains of the Romanovs, but the discovery was too dangerous to reveal. The Soviet Union still ruled, and the murder of the Tsar's family was a forbidden subject. The grave was marked, documented quietly, and then left in silence for years. The secret would not be spoken until the USSR itself began to crumble. When the grave was finally exhumed in 1991, after the Soviet collapse, the world held its breath. 9 skeletons were lifted from the Soiltzer, Nicholas II, Serena Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, along with loyal servants, but 2 were missing: the sickly heir, Alexei, and 1 daughter. The whispers reignited with explosive force. Was the missing daughter Anastasia? Had the legend been true all along? Newspapers across the globe ran the story. The missing princess. Monarchists felt vindicated. Believers in Anna Anderson declared it proof, and storytellers everywhere celebrated the endurance of the myth. Scientists stepped forward. Forensic experts studied the bones, comparing them to photographs, analyzing trauma, bullet holes, bayonet strikes. The skeletons told a brutal story. The Romanovs had indeed been massacred in that basement, their bodies mutilated and hastily buried. Yet the absence of 2 bodies kept the embers of hope alive. The case then passed into the hands of a new weapon: DNA. For the first time, science had the power to answer what history and rumor could not. Samples from the remains were compared with living relatives of the Romanovs, including Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth II of Britain, who shared mitochondrial DNA with Alexandra's line. The results were conclusive. The skeletons were Roman. The Tsar, the Serena, 3 daughters, all identified. But who was missing? Was it Maria? Was it Anastasia? Or had the myth finally been disproved? The answer came slowly. In 2007, nearly 90 years after the execution, a second grave was discovered near the first. Within it lay charred bone fragments, small, fragile, belonging to a boy and a girl. DNA confirmed the boy was Alexei, the girl one of his sisters. Together, the remains closed the circle. All 4 daughters were accounted for. Anastasia had not escaped. The news sent shockwaves. For decades, people had believed in her survival. Entire books, plays, films, and even childhood dreams had been built on the idea that she had walked away from that blood-soaked basement. Now, science stripped the myth bare. The Romanovs had all died together on that July night in 1918. And what of Anna Anderson? Her body, cremated in 1984, had left behind only tissue samples. These 2 were tested in the 1990s, compared to the DNA of Romanov relatives. The verdict was damning. Anna Anderson was not Anastasia. She was Franziska Shanskowska, a Polish factory worker with a troubled past and a tragic imagination. The princess she had claimed to be was never hers. For believers, it was heartbreak. For skeptics, vindication. But the truth was undeniable. Anastasia Romanov had not survived. The miracle was a myth. Yet, even in the face of scientific certainty, the story refused to die. People still whispered, still clung to the romance of escape. Some refused to believe the DNA results, calling them falsified, manipulated, part of a conspiracy to bury the truth. Others argued that Anastasia had become something larger than a single girl. She had become a symbol of survival, hope, and resistance to the brutality of history. The myth had done what reality could not. It had given the world a story of light in the darkest of times. And so, even as her bones rested in consecrated ground, Anastasia lived on, not in flesh, not in hidden exile, but in the imagination of millions. The princess who should have died remained the princess who lived in novels, in films, in plays, in the hearts of those who longed for miracles. The story of Anastasia Romanov did not end with DNA, nor with bones buried in Russian soil. In many ways, that was only the beginning, because even as science closed the door on her survival, imagination refused to let her go. Across the world, people continued to whisper her name. Children still read fairy tales of the princess who escaped. Filmmakers returned again and again to her story, from haunting dramas to animated musicals. In classrooms, professors taught about the execution of the Romanovs, yet students asked the same question. But what about Anastasia? Couldn't she have lived? This was the strange power of her legend. She was both alive and dead, both myth and truth. Her story was like a coin spinning in the air, never quite landing. The brutal reality of that basement in Ekaterinburg was undeniable. But so too was the beauty of the mytha idea that innocence could survive horror, that hope could slip through the cracks of history. Why did the world cling so tightly to Anastasia? Perhaps it was because her story arrived at a moment when humanity was drowning in despair. The First World War had killed millions. Empires had collapsed. Revolution and famine tore through nations. And in the midst of all that destruction, the story of a single girl surviving felt like a lifeline. She became more than Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanov, daughter of Nicholas II. She became every child lost to war, every innocent crushed by power, every soul refusing to die even when history demanded it. The legend also gave the world a mirror. To monarchists, she was proof that dynasties could endure. To exiles, she was hope that not all had been lost. To ordinary people, she was a reminder that miracles might still happen even when the world had turned to ash. Even in modern times, long after science disproved the survival myth, Anastasia continues to live. The 1997 animated film turned her into a heroine of song and adventure, a girl reclaiming her name and destiny. Broadway transformed her into a voice on stage, singing of journeys from darkness into light. Children who knew nothing of the Romanovs still grew up believing in Anastasia, the lost princess who found herself. But the true Anastasia, the girl of flesh and blood, remains in shadow. She was playful, rebellious, often called a troublemaker by her tutors. She loved animals, pranks, and laughter. She was 16 when her life was cut short. History tried to erase her in a flurry of bullets and bayonets, but it failed, because even in death she became immortal. Perhaps that is the final paradox of her story. She did not survive that night in Ekaterinburg, and yet she survived more completely than anyone else. While kings and emperors are forgotten, while revolutions crumble into dust, Anastasia Romanov endures, her name spoken by millions, her face imagined anew with every generation. So was she a miracle survivor or a myth? The answer is both. She survived not in body, but in legend, not in exile, but in imagination. She escaped the grave not with footsteps in the snow, but with the stories people told, the songs they sang, the dreams they passed on. Anastasia's story reminds us that sometimes history is not only about facts, but about the truths people need. And perhaps that is why, more than a century later, we are still talking about her. The Romanovs died in silence, but Anastasia lives in voices. The youngest daughter of a fallen dynasty, shot in a basement, buried in a forest, reborn in legend. A girl who should have been forgotten, but instead became unforgettable. The lost heir of Russia remains lost stand yet. In the world's imagination, she is forever found.